Welcome. My name is Darrin Meynarik. Is this on? Yeah. Okay. My name is Darrin Meynarik, and I am a professor in special education at Radford University. Our presentation this afternoon, along with Dr. Leslie Daniel, is supporting independence through self-determination and inclusion. So, before we get started with this workshop, we would like to go through what we plan to do for today. That will include first examining this notion of what inclusion is, looking at characteristics, barriers, and statistics. We're going to examine stigma and perception. And Dr. Daniel and I have heard a lot of discussions during this conference about this topic of seeing disability as a difference, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that. We will also examine the concept of self-determination, so if you're not familiar with that, we will talk about the history behind that. And then we're going to look at the foundation of how you make sure that instruction is fully inclusive. From that foundation, we are then going to talk about the various social and educational tools that are possible that you could use in an inclusive classroom setting and in an inclusive school setting. And then we're going to turn it to you all, and we're going to have you tell us how you can apply this to your own situations. How many of you are currently students? How many of you are students? Okay, how many, do we have any educators, current teachers? Couple teachers. Professors, teacher educators. Okay. What about parents or other people who work with people with disabilities? All right. Thank you. So you have some materials in front of you. They're in English. I apologize if you can't read in English. But the Radford University, we have a center at our university called the Virginia Inclusive Practices Center. And the vision, the beliefs of our center are what you see up here. And when you think about inclusion, you think about it as being a vision, as well as a practice. So it's something that you believe in your heart to be right, but it's also something that's really important for us to do every day with students, with people with disabilities, to fully include them in our society. So it's more than just a placement with peers without disabilities. In the United States, this is something that we've been working on now for over 20 years. We've been focusing on trying to address the needs of students in more inclusive settings. We write a lot about what good inclusion should look like, but we don't practice it very well in the United States. We have small pockets in different places, but we are not, as a nation, fully inclusive with our schools. How many of you are familiar with the IEP in American education, the Individualized Education Program? Has anyone heard of that before? Any show of hands? A few? So the Individualized Education Program is the legal document that protects students with disabilities in the United States. It protects their rights, makes sure that they can get a good education in school. And one part of that document, one part of the law that document represents, talks about the least restrictive environment, that students need to be placed in the setting that is least restrictive, that allows them to learn the best, that allows them to participate the best in school. And so we have a saying that the least restrictive environment needs to begin with a least restrictive attitude, that you have to believe that students belong with their peers without disabilities. If you don't believe that, inclusion is a hard thing to accomplish. And ultimately, like the title of our presentation, if students aren't included in school together, how will they ever learn to be included in society in general? And how will those of us without disabilities know how to be with people without disabilities if we don't go to school with them, if we don't play with them, if we don't work with them and socialize with them? So that's a really important piece. So it's important for us to challenge when someone has a negative perception of disability. It's important to have very high expectations for people with disabilities. And most important, it's important to empower them with the ability to advocate for themselves, to understand who they are as a person with a disability, and we're going to get more into that. Full participation in school and community is important, full citizenship in adult life, and to do all this by understanding the research behind inclusion. That's a critical piece too. We wanted to give you a sense of what inclusion looks like in the United States right now. So the way we collect data in the US is the amount of time a student spends in the classroom with their peers without disabilities. An interesting thing about that data is that that doesn't mean they're getting a good education, right? It just means they have a seat in the classroom with their peers without disabilities, and we have to keep that in mind. But if you look up here, 62% in Virginia, the number on the left of the slash in each column is Virginia statistics, and the number on the right is the United States as a whole. And so the categories, if we start at the top, multiple disabilities. So this is a person who has both maybe a physical and intellectual disability, multiple disabilities. Those students are rarely included in our society in a general education setting for at least 80% of the day or more. You can see over half of them are actually included for less than 40% of the day. And that's a concern of ours here in the United States. Intellectual disability, the numbers are also very similar. Autism, the numbers go up, but still not even half of students with autism are fully included, which we consider full inclusion at least 80% of the day. The reason for that is when you have a disability, you need interventions. You need support services, and those can't always be completely done in a general education classroom with peers without disabilities. Sometimes they have to be pulled out of that classroom setting and provide those services. So 80% is kind of our goal. And then you can see the overall, 62% as 80% or more of the day. So the United States, we have a long way to go. And I don't know if that data is collected or taken here in Saudi Arabia, but that's something to think about, that benchmark of 80% of the day or longer in school with peers without disabilities in that general education classroom. I want to hear from you all. This is a workshop. It's not a 2-hour lecture. What are some of the barriers that exist for students with disabilities to become independent? What are some of the barriers for our young people with disabilities? What barriers exist in your country? Yes? So physical barriers, physical access. Others, what about, do you see attitudinal barriers? How people see disability, do you see that as a barrier? And if so, how? Yes. Does it work? I don't know.
They mark disability as a shame, and that person who has a disability is like abandoned from the group.
Okay, so disability as a shame, as something, and then they're kept away from the group, separated from the group sometimes. What about in school? How are students included in school right now, or are they? Students with disabilities.
In our society, they have separated school for disabled people.
Okay, so separate schools. And in the United States, we do have some separate schools too, or we have centers that are specific. But like I said, we're trying to move away from that. Our goal is to actually provide those services within the regular school setting. Other barriers could be resources or funding. It seems like here in Saudi Arabia, through the presentations, that you all have support and funding. This conference, I think, is an example of that. So it's just a matter of now figuring out a way to implement and support that here in Saudi Arabia. And you also have the laws that are beginning to support people with disabilities, just like we have in the United States. And so that is definitely a barrier that's being brought down here in Saudi Arabia, just like we have begun to break that barrier in the U.S. So this is a chart that I have often used in the United States when I go out and present for our Inclusive Practices Center. Our teachers will often say some of those things that you see on the right. Closer? Oh, sorry. They will often say say the things that you see closer on the right. Segregated educational settings better serve students with disabilities. So that's kind of a myth that exists within our society. We know from research that that's not always the case. One big study that we did, we had the National Transitional Longitudinal Study in the United States, and we did two, looking at data over a 10-year period of students who graduated from high school. We learned that students that were more fully included with their peers without disabilities were more likely to be employed once they graduated from high school. They were more likely to live independently. They were more likely to seek other forms of education once they graduated from high school. Those are important things. The second myth, students with disabilities are more unlike than like their typical peers. And so that's that notion that people can't be together because of difference. And that's something that we try to break. There's a concern among our teachers that we will try to create an approach to teaching that's one size fits most. We won't be able to individualize. It's too hard to have students with disabilities in the classroom with students at different levels. And then finally, we have something called the continuum model in the United States where, and you saw that with the percentages, that our students with more complex disabilities end up not included, and oftentimes they're automatically assumed to not be able to make it in a general education setting. So they're automatically placed in an alternative setting simply because of their label, simply because they're identified as autistic or a person with an intellectual disability or a person with multiple disabilities. So if you want to begin the process of inclusion in your country, just like in the United States, one thing that we've learned, the first thing that needs to be addressed is stigma. We need to educate. We need to get people familiar with people with disabilities, comfortable around people with disabilities. We even work on our language. How you speak to a person with a disability. You might notice that I don't talk about intellectually disabled people, or I don't use the word mental retardation. That's no longer like in our vocabulary in the United States. But I usually try to put the person first. I don't talk about the disability. I focus on that second. But what I do that's most important is when I approach a person with a disability, I find out from them how they want to be addressed. So it's more person-centered. Because they may be very proud of who they are, their disability. I have friends in the United States who are deaf, and they want to be identified as deaf first. I'm deaf. I'm proud to be deaf. It's part of who I am. Same with people who are autistic. There are some who say I'm autistic, and I'm proud to be autistic. It makes me who I am. And so don't put that second. Put that first. That's who I am. So now I'm asking you all, and I want you to actually turn to each other and talk to each other for a moment. And I want you to think about, how do you see disability? And be honest. Do you see it as more of a medical condition? Something that can be prevented or cured or fixed? Or do you approach disability that from a perspective of it being more of something that we socially construct? Are you only disabled because the ramp isn't in the building? Are you only disabled because the Braille text wasn't provided for you? Does society disable the person? So talk to each other for just a minute and think about, do you have more of a medical view or more of a socio-cultural view of disability? I'll give you a minute. It sounds like there's some good discussion going on. I want to hear what you're talking about, if you can share with me. Yeah, I would like to know. Yeah, if you don't want to, that's fine, but it's okay. I don't know if it's working. Thank you. Somebody else. It's blinking.
فنحتاج يعني الجميع سواء التعليم الخاص او الانجاز عشان التأهيل نوضح مشكلة معاه، هل هو بس حالة نفسية بحيث نتعالج او نخليه في البيت؟ لا، هو اوسع من كذا، انه لازم زلزال المجتمع، لازم احنا موقف كمجتمع التأهيل انه يخلي العلاج في مجتمع مو مستشفى، نطلع من المستشفيات والمحاكم الصحية. يعني نوفر نقدر نوفر خواتم التأهيل خاصة انها تروح انها مدرسة الطفل اللي عنده إعاقة وفي بيته، وتوفر له برضه يعني بدل ما عنده قدرة مثلا نقص قدرة في مثلا مجتمع فيها ما اقدر اوفر له حاجات طبيعية واخليه زي الطلاب العاديين عند مجتمعهم ومجتمعهم عادي. فأتوقع أن هذه يعني لازم تتغير سالفة حالة صحية فقط.
Yes, and I think one important thing to remember is that this was a trick question. I was asking you to say, are you one or the other? And it's okay to be both. Because it's difficult to separate the medical, in some cases, from those other aspects. In the United States, it's difficult for us because it begins with a label. The student is identified and is given a document that says you have this disability and you have a right to these protections because of this disability. So automatically in our minds as special educators, we're put into the medical model, the medical lens. But I think it's important in order to include people in society that we have to recognize that we as educators, as therapists, in rehabilitation, that we can also disable people by how we act, by our actions, by the things that we do. And so that's really the point of this exercise. To begin, hopefully you all, as you prepare yourselves or as you continue to go out and educate and work with young people, hopefully you will keep that in mind and ask that question of yourself all the time. Am I enabling and supporting this person and giving them the skills to be independent, or am I doing something that could potentially restrict them, that actually disables them more by the way I act or by the way I see disability? Yes? I think it's difficult not to label because you're trying to provide service and support. In a perfect world, you know, I think there's a bumper sticker in the United States that says label people or label jars, not people. So, you know, instead of having a label on a jar of some food or something, you know, you should be labeling jars. You shouldn't be putting labels on people. But we do that. We're humans. We label each other all the time, right? So it's tough. So I think the best educators I've come across are those that always try to avoid putting that label in the front, making that label the most important thing. Yeah, in the United States, it's not possible because of funding. The label is directly related to receiving support through federal funds. But, you know, like I say, in an ideal world, yes, it would be nice not to label. Do you want to speak to it?
If we could, that would be the best thing. I agree. I know in my own college classes that I teach, I will accommodate anybody. You don't have to tell me you have a disability because I have many students who do have disabilities. I will just accommodate. I can make changes to how I teach or how you're situated or how many breaks you take. So I can do that as one individual, but yeah, the reality of funding being tied to disability, to have enough support. In America, we don't have enough money for the support that is needed. So that restricts us.
Yes. So, I mean, the presentation, we're going to probably get to a lot of those steps throughout this presentation, but it really does begin by having the conversation that we're having right now. If you're working, whatever facility you're working in, whether it's a school or a hospital or wherever you are, you have to have conversations with colleagues about how people see disability. You have to have those conversations. Inclusion can't exist without people beginning to think about how they view people with disabilities. That's the first step to an inclusive environment. Discussion, talk, communication with each other. And then following that, yeah, so inclusion in schools, when we go out and we work with schools in the United States, this is the first thing that we do. We usually meet with administrators, and we will first get them to buy into the idea of including students with disabilities, and then we'll step in and provide some professional development to teachers. And the first piece of that professional development is looking at the culture of the school. What is the culture of the school in terms of how people see disability? And that's the first step. Teachers who don't usually have students with disabilities in their classroom have all of those negative perceptions that I mentioned, those myths. They believe that those students will make their classroom less successful. And so we show them the data that that's not true. We show them that we have had successes with this. And we show, more importantly, how successful students with disabilities are. There have been many studies done in the United States that show that students without disabilities are not negatively impacted by having these students with disabilities in the classroom with them. However, students with disabilities have much higher degrees of academic success because they're included in that classroom setting. And we also know that socially, everybody improves. Everybody becomes more comfortable with inclusion. So it's that early education that's important. And then we'll talk about some of the other things that you can do once you get to that step. That's an excellent question. You all are getting to the end. You can't go to the end first. We have to go through steps. So, self-determination. How many of you, raise of hands, have heard of self-determination before? Just a few, okay. So, my background is in two areas. I was in the United States, a social studies teacher, so I taught United States history and U.S. government and world history, those courses, social sciences. When I became a special educator, I learned about self-determination, and I looked at it and I said, wow, that means being a citizen, being included in your society. That's what self-determination means. Basically, when you hear self-determination, it means that a person has the power to advocate for themselves. They understand what their disability is, and they can tell you what their disability is what they need, what supports they need. They can share those things with you, and they understand how to advocate. So they have control over their lives. You'll see a number of different definitions, but in the end, it just means that they control aspects of their life. Even people with significant disabilities are given control over their lives. They may have supports, friends, family, others who support them, but all those supports try their best to do what the person wants, what the person needs. It's not about you, it's about them. So this chart kind of addresses that to be self-determined, you need to have the knowledge, you need to understand who you are, you need to understand your disability, you need to have the skills to be able to say, I need somebody to read that text to me because I have difficulty because of dyslexia or a learning disability, I can't read it myself. Or I need somebody to open that door for me because it needs to have a power opening so that I can get through with my wheelchair. You have to be able to say that. You have to be able to understand that and advocate for that. So that's a skill. That's one of the skills. You also have to believe. Self-determination means you believe in yourself. We're going to see a video of young men and women, boys and girls, teenagers, who believe in themselves. You're going to see them in just a moment, and we'll have an opportunity to understand how we teach our students to advocate. And when you have the knowledge and beliefs together, that gives them the confidence then to be self-determined. Another way of looking at it is from the standpoint of social justice, how people are treated, the idea of equity, of opportunity. So for students to be fully included, for young people to be fully included in society, people with disabilities, special education, rehab, general education, OT, PT, everybody needs to work together. And if they are all working together, then those students are going to be recognized. They're going to become self-determined. They're going to have the ability to solidarity, so they're going to feel like they can relate to you as well as you can relate to them. And that ultimately leads to that notion of social justice, that people will be treated with equity, with opportunity. And that really is inclusion in society, if we get to that point. So in Virginia, you have a program, or there's a program called the I'm Determined Project, and this was started by the Virginia Department of Education. I had the opportunity to help create the I'm Determined program back in 2008. And on your tables, you have a sticker, a bumper sticker for a car or for whatever, so you can spread the word about I'm Determined here in Saudi Arabia. There is a website for it. And actually, I looked at the analytics, and Saudi Arabia was like third or fourth on the list of countries that has hit that website the most. So that was actually exciting to see that there are, and primarily here in Riyadh. So we're going to take a look at a video here. And I think we're not on the internet, so give me a moment. It's not coming up. Hang on. Now the video's gone. Where'd it go?
Go towards me. There you go.
Yeah, it's saying there's no items.
Oh.
Oh, that's in the music library. So go.
coming to you in a few minutes is called the Youth Credo. It is a statement of belief by fellow youth in this room. It was started at last year's Self-Determination Youth Summit in Roundup, Virginia. Over the summer, youth used the wiki and the social network called Facebook to discuss the credo and make changes to it. The idea for this credo came from the Credo for Support, a short video we saw on YouTube during last year's Youth Summit. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to present the Youth Credo.
Do not leave me behind. Do follow me.
Do not assume I need your help.
Ask me if I need your help.
Do not labor me.
Do accept me for who I am.
Do not think that you know about people with disabilities.
Do educate yourself about all disabilities.
Do not assume I want to be like you.
Do assume I like the way I am.
Do not assume what you know is normal.
Do presume that nobody is normal.
Do not hold me to your standards.
Do recognize that I have my own standards.
Do not see me through my disability.
Do see me as an individual.
Do not cut me down to size.
I do expand my permanent.
Do not call me by my label.
Do call me my name.
Do not be friends with me because you feel sorry for me.
Do be my friend because of who I am.
Do not tell me what I can do.
Do let me show you what I can do.
Do not patronize me.
Do be understanding and helpful when I ask for assistance.
Do not help me for your own benefit.
Do help me for me.
Do not express your hate.
Do express your love.
Do not attempt to run my life. Do let me make my own decisions.
Do not stare at me.
Do talk to me.
Do not judge me.
Do respect me.
Do not deny me. Do show me the way.
Do not doubt me.
Do trust me.
Do not assume I am stupid.
Do let me show you that I'm smart.
Do not call me inferior.
Do you call me intellectual?
Do not leave me behind.
Do follow me.
1, 2, 3.
So what I want you all to do now is to, again, take a moment and talk with each other. What self-determination skills, how were those young people self-determined? What were they telling you to do?
The video that will be coming to you in a few minutes is called the Youth Credo.
What were they telling you to do? Because they are talking to us as educators. They're talking to us as people who will work with people with disabilities. So talk with each other and let's begin to think about what do young people want us to do for them. So tell me, what did they teach you? What did you learn from those young people? Yes.
I can speak in one word. They want us to deal with them as usual people. They feel something.
Yes. They're human. They're people. Treat us like people.
Like you, exactly.
Yeah, it's a good way to sum it up, right? Yeah, in the back? Yes. Okay, so it's not about being sympathetic. It's about just treating them like you would treat any person. It's that notion of equity. It's that notion of respect. Excellent. So once you get through this discussion, as you move towards pushing for inclusion, you've learned about self-determination. One thing that we want to see in the classroom setting is we want to see instruction be done in such a way that students with disabilities can be included with their peers without disabilities. So a good way of thinking about instruction, if you're writing a lesson plan or if you're thinking about teaching somebody something, and you have a classroom with students that are very high-level learners that will take a topic and they will go very far with it. They will do things that you wouldn't even think about. And then you have students who are just struggling with remembering very basic things about the topic. You need to decide in an inclusive classroom what you want every student to learn first. And so on the left, that's that notion of what do I want all students? So what all students will learn is the first thing you think about when you're lesson planning. But then you also want to make sure that you reach more than just all students might learn one particular thing, but you want to make sure that you challenge students to learn more. So you want to think about what you would expect most students in your classroom to learn, but you also want to think about what maybe some students would learn but others won't. Why do you think it's important to think about instruction this way? Yeah, I was waiting for that.
Yes, try. We are trying to give the structure. The instruction will help us to teach. Will help the student to gain information as much as possible. Because if you work with the very smart one, you will ignore the other one. But if we do like this structure, everybody can learn as much as possible, and then the very smart one can increase self-education or something like that. But the one who is not very smart or less, or he have something in remembering, he can learn, and whoever else want to learn extra, they're gonna do it individually or self-education.
I was waiting for the translation. So. So a really important thing to think about is that when you structure a lesson this way, you're not assuming that a student can't do something. You're assuming that all students can at least reach a certain point, and then you're giving an opportunity for all students to reach a higher point. Some of them may not, but you're giving that opportunity, and that's what inclusion is about, providing that opportunity, pushing students to learn more than what you might expect. So it takes away, if you have a negative stigma about somebody because of how you think what you think they're able to do. If you plan a lesson this way, you will be surprised at what a student can do with a disability. You will be pleasantly surprised because you are challenging them to push themselves beyond, and you become the teacher who pushes them beyond what you believed they could do. So it almost takes away that negative perception. And the structure on the right just focuses on the idea of we have to provide that teacher direct instruction first, like how I'm talking to you, but then it also has to eventually be released. Eventually, we need to give the students more control over their own learning. And so that's what that chart kind of addresses. It goes from teachers modeling the I do it approach to us working together in groups, the we do it approach, to then turning it over to the students, but maybe having them support each other. And then finally, they become independent. And ultimately, that's the goal, independence, being able to think and learn on your own. So in the United States, we focus on two primary principles to address this idea of instruction. The first is universal design for learning. This cartoon that I show in the United States, we live in Radford, Virginia. A week ago, we just had 14 inches of snow on the ground. We live in the mountains. And so this cartoon may not work well for you all, but it works really well for my students in Virginia. The man is shoveling snow on the stairs, and the young man who's the wheelchair user says, "Could you please shovel the ramp?" And then the man says, "Well, all these boys and girls are waiting. I need to shovel the stairs first." And then the student in the wheelchair says, "Well, if you shoveled the ramp, we can all get in." So the idea behind that, meaning if you create a lesson that's accessible to all of your students, there's no need to create separate lessons for everybody. There's no need to shovel the stairs and the ramp. You can just shovel the ramp, and it's a lot easier. Yep. And that's an important thing to remember, too, because many of us benefit from the supports that we provide people with disabilities. How many of you have walked on the ramps here? Has anyone walked on any of the ramps or found that? I know I have. Or used an electric door. Or we're thankful because there was, maybe you were, if you in the United States, I know when my children were born, the curb cuts where the curbs weren't raised up, I was so thankful for those when we had a baby in a baby stroller and not having to hop up onto the curb. So we use things that we've created to help support people with disabilities all the time. If your hands are full, you're very thankful for the power door, right? So that's universal design. That's what that's all about. And then differentiation. So think of universal design as a proactive way of creating something. And then if you didn't think of every way of making something accessible, you differentiate. You provide, you see the individual needs of the student, and you provide supports in order to help them access the content, help them learn. And these are the two primary systems that we teach our students in the United States in order to create lessons, in order to support inclusive practices in our schools. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Daniel, and we are going to begin talking to you all about specific supports dealing with academic, social, emotional, and physical access.
Hello. So we could teach probably at least 3 hours on any one of these slides, and we do. We can teach a whole course on this. So you're getting this snapshot. So the snapshot for supporting students with disabilities, you need the key to get into inclusive situations, as you were asking about. How can we best support students? for academic inclusion, physical inclusion, that access that you talked about earlier, and social emotional inclusion, where they feel involved, part of the community, well-liked, have friends that they want, and so forth. We're going to do snapshots here too. We chose some key ways that we believe you need to support individuals with disability. The first being through communication. That tends to be my number one thing I look for when I do consultations with kids and families and schools, is does the child have a good means of communication? And when I say child, I pretty much mean from kindergarten through 12th grade. So I'm talking about all children, but then again, I teach at the university level, and I call those folks my kids too. So of course, first there is verbal communication, but not everybody can communicate super well verbally. Some people have verbal communication. For instance, right now I have a fairly significant disability in that I do not speak any Arabic. That's getting in my way. If I had a little Arabic, I would feel so much better. And I tried to acquire a little Arabic, but my pronunciation was so bad I was afraid that I'd be saying offensive things, so I daren't even try. So we can support each other. Right now we are being well supported with wonderful translators who are telling us what each other is saying if we don't understand each other. We can use other supports to help people get their verbal message across sometimes. There's also written communication, which is an excellent means of communication. I am, again, at a disability here in Saudi Arabia because I do not use WhatsApp. And I have been told I am wrong for not using WhatsApp. If I had WhatsApp, I could communicate much better. I text, I email, I use Instant Messenger on Facebook, I talk to people. But that is written communication that can be very supportive of somebody, so we could use that as a method. We're going to talk a little more about augmentative communication or voice output devices in a minute. There's also sign language, and I've been fascinated. I'm always fascinated by sign language. Watching the opening ceremonies yesterday with the interpreters and the deaf community that was in the audience. And of course, the Saudi Sign Language is very different from the American Sign Language system, and it's beautiful as well. And so I was enjoying watching that. There are hundreds of sign language systems for every language that there needs to be. Picture exchange Picture exchange communication system, or also known as PECS. And I visited in the hall. What's that called? The vendor hall. The Autism Center from Saudi Arabia, and they had a wonderful PECS book. So if I'm not going to talk much about PECS, but it's a communication system using pictures that people hand each other to give a message across. And then there's also supported typing or facilitated communication, which I'm going to spend zero time talking about. Lots of ways that we can support communication so people with disabilities can be much more included in their classrooms. So augmentative communication, how many of you are already familiar with augmentative communication devices? Okay, just a couple. Okay. So I've just captured a few pictures of a very, very few. There are hundreds and hundreds. Augmentative communication devices basically work in two ways. One, these are simple recording devices. So the yellow button in the upper left, I don't know if it's left or right corner, that's my other disability. I'm not good with left and right from your point of view versus mine. The yellow button. That's one message, and I could hold that and press it, and I could give a 2 or 3 minute book report to my class, and it would just say, so it records one message. Then next to it you see 8 buttons on a white box, colorful buttons. That's called the Cheap Talk, and that records 8 messages. So I would record it, I would set it up. I might set it up for a student to say, today is Monday, April 2nd, and the next button might say, the weather is clearing, the sand has calmed. Another button might say, how many students are in class today, and so forth. So we would just record one message at a time. Then it has to be re-recorded very quickly, very easily, in your voice, or preferably the gender and the same age. You get somebody else to record so it matches the person, the voice that they prefer. The Go Talk in the bottom corner, which is green on a stand, that has 45 messages. It doesn't look like it has 45 messages. It looks like it has 9 plus 3, but it's a leveled device. So I can change the level and I have 9 more messages recorded, and then I can change the level and 9 more. So I could have it set up for a reading class, a writing class, a history class, and so forth ahead of time. And then in the bottom corner, that's just a smartphone. And your smartphone, of course, is so incredibly powerful. On that one, it's picturing Proloquo to Go, which is a particular application that is, it is all designed around augmentative communication. So it's using the power of the computer in your phone, and it changes screens, and it's a computerized voice, sort of like Siri talking to you on your phone. But you can also record your own voice or the voice of the gender of a person that you would prefer. Very powerful tool. Of course, you have to buy the phone, but then you buy the software as well. And in America, that costs not quite $300 for the software. Very powerful for the cost of your phone. It can also be used on an iPad and larger devices if a phone is too small. So augmentative communication is a very powerful tool that you can use with people who don't maybe have good use of their voice at all. Now, I'm moving away from communication because, as we said, I'm giving you snapshots, little snapshots, but actually, let me move back. Did anybody have any questions? Because I will try and pause and let you interject. Okay. All right.
How does communication lead to independence?
For the translator, how does communication lead to independence? Yes, sir.
For example, if somebody cannot communicate without like assistive technology or something like that, if he has a communication tools like device or something like that, he can communicate independently with other people without help from each other, from anybody else.
Exactly. It's going to support our inclusion and our independence because we're going to be communicating for ourselves. Any other input or questions? Yes, sir. So they can express their needs and be understood through their communication. Yes, absolutely. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes, it would make it much easier for access. Absolutely.
دكتور.
Yes.
بشكل عام تكمل النقص الموجود لدى ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة، سواء في اللغة، سواء في التفاعل أو توصيل إيصال المفاهيم، فهي مساعدة لهم، مكملة.
Yes, so it can be valuable, and it makes things a little easier so that less of their disability is in their way. Absolutely. Okay. So now we're going to talk about supporting social skills. And again, I've listed some of my favorite methods on this screen, but we're only going to talk about one of them in depth. So the one we're going to talk a little more about is social stories, which was developed by Carol Gray, a researcher in Indiana. She also developed comic strip conversations, which you can look up. I'm not going to belabor other than to say it's a comic. It is making comic pictures, drawing, thought bubbles, writing with a student to have them tell you and you explain to them in a visual form what is going on. Video modeling is a very powerful tool. That is capturing video of a person. So if it's a person with a disability, capturing video and perhaps having to edit it of them doing what you're hoping that they will learn to do. So for instance, if they're having trouble lining up and walking to the cafeteria without smacking other kids on the head as they go, then you create a video, and you might have to edit it, of them lining up and walking without smacking. And then they watch it as a review. This is what we want you to do. So it's a model of a good video. You can also videotape other people doing the correct behavior or acting in a preferred way, again, for a model for somebody so that they can participate in their classes socially where they might normally get into a little bit of trouble. Power cards is another method, which is giving a written sort of script. It's almost like being Superman of hey, here's what you need to do to be powerful in this social situation. There's much more to it than that. I don't have much time. And then multiple relaxation techniques. Daren, he's wearing a smartwatch, an Apple Watch. It occasionally tells him to breathe. He'll be like, oh, okay, maybe I got a little anxious. I need to breathe now. And he was a little worried that from over there it was going to tell me to breathe, but it hasn't yet. But there's multiple relaxation techniques. Using yoga with kids or even meditation. Multiple relaxation techniques that can help kids calm down so that they can be in an environment. Because when you're really anxious, it's very difficult to be in an environment. Was anybody at the lecture yesterday when I was presenting? Okay, good. You're not going to hear this twice then. Good. Okay. This is a social story. A social story is a story that you write, again, around a behavior that helps a person understand how they're supposed to behave in a given social situation. So this social story is about working quietly. And it says, usually the students need to be quiet during work time. This means that there is very little talking, but maybe some whispering. Now, the important thing about that first paragraph is it says usually, because in classrooms, kids are not always quiet. Well, not in America, they're not. They're chatty. So usually the kids are quiet. Having it quiet allows the students to get their work completed. The teacher is happy when the students are quietly doing their work. I am one of the students. I have work to do. I will try to do the work quietly that the teacher assigns. Again, helping them understand the expectation. And this seems probably fairly basic. Of course you're usually quiet. But if you're a person with autism who finds it difficult to be quiet, then maybe you need a little social skill instruction around that to help them understand, hey, I'm supposed to be quiet at this time. Maybe another story says it's okay for me to talk at another time. So there are times when it's okay for us to be more chatty. Social stories have a lot of research behind them that they work especially well. The research is more with people with autism, but I have used social stories with people with Down syndrome and intellectual disabilities, and they've worked well. This one I didn't put any graphics with, no artwork, but you could also illustrate, just like a children's book. Carol Gray shares a story. One of her students that she was working with, he liked to read the back of cereal boxes, kids' cereal that would have little games and stories on them. So she put social stories on the back of cereal boxes for him. And he wanted to read them because they were in his favorite place to read. So making it intriguing for people is going to be helpful. If you're supporting somebody's social needs, if you're teaching them, why bother teaching somebody to be social? How could that help? And I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Having fun and communicating is so important. You're absolutely, school can be kind of boring sometimes. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's never boring here. But it is boring. Okay, yeah, it's boring. Okay. So having a little fun is very helpful. And we learn to be social when we are having fun with people. You're not learning to be social here today. Of course, you are all social people. So you don't need to learn those skills. But sitting listening to me blather on doesn't help you be social. Being fun does. Any other insight? To push them out of their comfort zone.
So they won't hesitate if you have something to say. They won't have fear of talking in front of the audience.
Yes, good point. So if we can push people a little, then they gain more and more skills, because in actuality we learn social skills by being social. And people who don't have good social skills won't be social. They won't interact. So we're learning those different skills. I've had several people approach me and ask, could they take my picture? And I am fine with people taking my picture. But it's interesting, in America, people are just snapping pictures all over the place. And nobody would ask my permission. It's interesting to be here and have permission asked of me. It's kind of nice, actually. Anybody? Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
ابتكار وسائل جديدة جاذبة للتواصل، تساعدهم على التواصل، خصوصا في المدارس. المعلمات يعملون على ابتكار وسائل حسية جاذبة.
Okay, so getting people involved with their senses and socially?
نعم، عن طريق الوسائل الحسية. نحن في المدارس يبتكرون المعلمات وسائل حسية خصوصا للتوحد، كثيرا حسنت من التواصل لديهم.
Yes.
ورفعت من قدراتهم ومستواهم كثير.
Absolutely. And we're going to...
وسائل بسيطة من البيئة، ربما تكون حبات أرز أو عدس أو مكرونة، واستخدموها الأمهات في المنزل. يعني أخذوا دورات لدينا بالمراكز، طبقوها في المنزل بحيث أن تنقل الخبرة من المركز إلى المنزل في فريق عمل. طبعا ولي الأمر هو جزء لا يتجزأ من فريق العمل مع طفل التربية الخاصة.
Yes, and you can come on up here and present, because that's the very next slide. So we're going to talk about supporting sensory methods. Yes.
Since we're on the slide, we have been sitting for 1 hour and 16 minutes. So everybody stand up and put your hands up and then stretch your fingers down. Put your hands up and then stretch your fingers down. Come on, everybody, stand up. Out of your comfort zone for a moment. For a little sensory. This is a sensory need to wake everybody up to get us moving, right? So stretch. You can stretch however you want to stretch. I usually don't tell students to do this because then they end up hitting each other. So I always say up or down, or pat your head and rub your belly, which is kind of hard to do.
I can't do that. So supporting sensory needs absolutely is the next big thing that we would want to do for students. We want to support their communication, we want to support them socially, and we want to support their sensory needs because those are going to impact their ability to interact in the classroom. One of my favorites is using fidget toys. And in case fidget toys doesn't translate, I brought just two with me. So they're just toys that you can play with that can be quiet, that can be subtle. I'm going to pass these around. Thank you. Just so you can see those. Fidget toys are one of my very favorite strategies to have. And in fact, I have a bag this big of fidget toys that I pass around my university classes. So if somebody needs to fiddle with something, I put coloring books in my fidget bag, Play-Doh, silly putty, these sorts of toys, other rubbery toys, stress balls. I used to fill balloons with rice and sand until I had one explode on me in the classroom, and then I went, okay, no more rice and sand in my class. I'll buy the more expensive ones. I let anybody who needs a fidget toy have a fidget toy because it's very supportive. I used one yesterday for part of my presentation. My presentation was in the main room right after the opening ceremony. His Royal Highness left, and I sat in that chair. I was very stressed. I pulled my fidget toys out and started doing this until it was time for me to talk. And it just made me feel a little more calm because, I couldn't stand up and do this. I was on the stage. You can support sensory needs by modifying the environment. So, for instance, I believe this environment just got modified that these front lights just got turned off, making the screen easier to see. But quite frankly, it's easier on my head, too. I don't like presenting underneath of overhead lights. It gives me a headache. So you can modify the environment to make people more comfortable. You can change the temperature. Now, here, I guess it's most always warm, and you need your air conditioning on. I don't know how often you're chilly in air conditioning. Women in America, mostly women, I rarely hear it from men, complain about how cold it is. Oh, I'm so cold, the air conditioning is so cold. And there's not, so how do we find the happy medium for everybody? Sometimes it's too hot, sometimes it's too cold. And how can we make people more comfortable with that? Change the seating. So many people in this room have chairs that spin. They spin, they rock. They actually rise up and down when you sit on them, too. They're padded. They're very nice. I'm sorry for those of you in the cheap seats on the side, because those aren't nearly as nice. But wouldn't it be nice if everybody had the kind of seat that worked best for them? We've, in the United States, and I'll be interested if you have here, we've got many classrooms who use the big therapy balls, the big exercise balls, as chairs. Is that happening here anywhere? Not yet? Okay. That may come. It's an option so that people, because you see these three gentlemen, they're spinning back and forth a lot. You're our wigglers, which is okay. Okay? It's important to be able to. There's also tea stools that allow rocking or extra cushions you could use. So just changing the seating could make certain students happier and more able to learn. It seems like such a little thing, and yet it's an enormous thing. Just going to peek ahead. Yes, okay. Wait time, I'm going to skip. I'm going to come to it in a minute. And then, so fidget toys is one of my favorite strategies. And then, when in doubt, write it out is a saying I use with my students. When in doubt, write it out means sometimes you're verbally overloading somebody. They can't process what you're saying. So for instance, right now, the interpreter is trying to catch up with me, and you're hearing me, you can hear the sound of my voice, and you're trying to listen to an interpreter. Sometimes that's just too much. If we could write in the same language, writing might be easier, but you really don't want to see me try and write in Arabic. You can probably write in English, like fabulously, but again, I could be really rude in Arabic and not intend to be at all, okay? But writing to somebody and just being quiet can sometimes allow people to process what you're trying to tell them. I'm going to go back to wait time. It's my second favorite strategy, I guess. Wait time is you ask a question. For instance, pick up a writing implement. And then you wait, letting the person process what you said and have the time to think about what did she just ask me to do? Because sometimes the problem is they're not processing the message. It's not getting through. Much like the translator needs a little time for the whole message to get through to me or to you, the student might need even more time. I like to tell people to wait 15 seconds if the person has autism. In America, we count our seconds by counting Mississippis. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, that's seconds. Okay, so you change it into whatever it is you count by seconds so that you can do it, or you're looking at your watch on your sweep second hand. But I bet it felt a little awkward when I was standing here quiet for 10 seconds. That was just 5 seconds of me waiting. And it can feel strange, like, why isn't she talking? Well, sometimes somebody else will fill the silence, which is good if they've processed and can give you the information back. And sometimes, for me, I had to practice. I had to practice a lot because I am not a quiet person by nature. So I had to kind of stand there, and I literally counted my Mississippis for quite a long time. I can kind of do it now and be fairly calm until I see other people getting really anxious around me. When I do it in a situation like this, it's like, she hasn't stopped talking. Why has she stopped talking now? What does that mean? Wait time is a very powerful tool, and one that is free and easily implemented. Now, I happen to know that this works with everybody. Well, I know it works on husbands. I know it works on my own personal children. And I know it has worked with every student I've ever taught. I am not 100% sure it works on wives because I've never taught my husband this strategy. But it's one to try right away. If you're interacting with somebody and they say, "What?" or "Huh?" That's the reaction we get in America. Huh? If they're doing that, then try waiting. Don't answer the "huh." And then they might come back and say, "Did you just ask me to take out the trash?" "Yes, I did." "Yes." So we began the discussion on how can meeting sensory needs help a person be more included and more successful. Any other thoughts on that? Is anybody?
Who has the fidget toy? Is somebody playing with it right now?
Is it meeting your sensory needs? Did it help? Good. Good. And as the lady was saying, another method that you actually already talked about is using, and I've provided to kids, just a plastic box full of rice, dried rice, not cooked, or dried beans, or sand that you can put your hands through. I love playing with it myself, but it can be very relaxing. It can also get your hands ready to do other work. It just sort of tells your hands, hey, wake up. It's time to do some schoolwork. Any other favorite strategies? Okay.
يوجد لدينا استراتيجيات عديدة لا تحضرني الآن ولكن عندي لديها صور في الجوال لو حبت تطلع عليها الدكتورة.
And there are so many strategies out there.
واليوم الدكتورة بمناسبة اليوم العالمي للتوحد أقمنا معرض أقمنا معرض مشاركة فيه الأمهات بأعمالهم والمعلمات. لو حبيتي بعد الورشة أن تطلع على الصور ليس لدينا مانع.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, it's Autism Awareness Day in the States. I guess it's everywhere in the world. It's lighted up blue. We drove by the Kingdom Center, and it was lit up blue. It was very exciting to me. Okay. Some other ways so we've supported communication, social, sensory. Now some more supporting of independence that we can incorporate into a class. I have so many favorites. I'm going to quit saying it's my favorite, but visual supports are some of my favorites. Giving kids schedules that they can follow, that they can hold. You have a conference schedule. You're marking things that you want to be at. We've had a very busy schedule since arriving in Riyadh. We've had multiple dinners with people. We had a meeting at the Ministry of Labor we had a meeting this morning somewhere. Wonderful. We've had to be at presentations, at sessions. You've got to keep track of things. And it's knowing how to get to places and do things. I'm feeling like I have a disability because I'm not in my home turf. And imagine if you felt like that all the time because of your disability. So visual schedules can help. To-do lists, I am personally addicted to to-do lists. Writing down everything I need to do so I can cross them off. And Darren uses it on his phone. I do my to-do list electronically sometimes, but if I'm feeling particularly out of control, I write them on pieces of paper so that I can really be aggressive in crossing things off my list. Self-monitoring tools and the incredible 5-point scale I'm going to show you. So on the far side is just an example of one visual schedule. Again, in the exhibit hall, the Autism Center has some wonderful examples of visual schedules that are in Arabic, unlike mine. This one reads top to bottom. And just a couple of things to highlight that not everybody thinks of. You see the red no sign, like no entrance. I like to leave what a child would normally do on a schedule and show them, hey, not today. Yeah, this is normally here, but nope. So that they get used to the idea of no, not. Not that it's just gone and nobody tells me what's going on, but yet here's the information you need. The orange box around 1 is another way of highlighting and making it a little more prominent that this is the space we are on the schedule. The storybook is Frog and Toad, and it's just his to-do list, which begins with get up, eat breakfast, and so forth. You know, if I'm having a bad day, I will write things on my to-do list that I've already done just to cross them off, like get up. Okay, I was successful today. I crossed something off my list. I did it. And that can be very powerful, so teaching that power to people with disabilities. A token board is another nice way to help somebody mark that, hey, as we said, sometimes school can be a little overwhelming or a little boring. This can mark, I'm working for something. Here's the classes I have to do on the bottom. And as they go away, I can earn a token, and I can get my preferred activity or a preferred reinforcer once I've completed so many or I've earned so many stars. So it's a visual way of saying, hey, I can monitor myself, how I'm doing, get myself through the day. Maybe I can move my tokens over. Hey, I made it. I get that. Then on this side with the smiley faces is a self-monitoring checklist of, again, watching how I'm doing in a particular time of the day. This is a very easy one to use. It's not yes, no, or a rating of 1 through 4. It's smiley face or frowny face. A nice easy one. Not everybody needs this easy. I'm showing you the easier ones to keep in mind that we can use this in lots of ways with lots of people. And then the 5-point scale, these are 2 different 5-point scales. This is a self-monitoring tool, but it's also a relaxation tool. These were developed by Carrie Dunburnan. And a 1 is where you want to be. Life is good. So on the far side, this one is about using a voice. This was a student who yelled a lot. So you wanted her on, here's a 1, no talking, or a 2 is whispering. A 3, hey, I'm talking in a voice that sounds okay. A 4, I'm getting kind of loud here. And a 5, I'm way too loud here. And you can point to it on the scale so somebody can go, oh, I'm at a 4, maybe I should come back to a 3. Or maybe right now is time for a 1. So you can point to it or ask a person, where should you be on your scale right now? Because sometimes it's okay to be way too loud. But that's outside when you're playing, in school at any rate. So there are times when it's okay. The other one is more about how a person feels emotionally and how anxious they are. So at 1, he's sitting, he's doing his work, he feels fine, and he can try and stay that way. So he's giving himself the strategies he needs to be okay. A 2 is, I'm pacing in the room, and I'm getting nervous, my brain is racing. So he's described how he feels when he is that stressed. He could write down his thoughts, go get a drink, or read his happy book to help calm back down. At a 3, he's ripping up his assignments, and he's running out of the room. He is feeling like, I can't stand it. And his strategy is he can walk to the weight room, lift some weights, write a note about how he's feeling. At a 4, he's screaming and swearing. He is like a train wreck. And he needs to walk away, stop talking. Others likewise need to stop talking to him. And for him, he could go to Mr. Nelson's office, which was a safe space that had been established. At a 5, he's throwing things, he's hurting other people. He is like a flood and he's drowning. And there's nothing he can do when he's at a 5. It's too late, he says. Other people should leave me alone. Too often when people are throwing and out of control, we want to help. And our best help sometimes can be to step back and give space and be quiet. So, and this child helped design his 5-point scale. So the 5-point scale can be anything, but it's helping somebody remember we want to be more towards a 1 than a 5. All right, I'm trading back with Darren again. I've taken tape with me.
We have technical difficulties.
Okay, here we go.
So what Dr. Daniel just showed you was a good example of a student advocating for themselves, right? She said that the student helped create that 5-point scale. So that's self-advocacy, and that's a really important self-determination skill that leads towards independence. Up here, what you see right now is something called a one-pager. And the website that I shared with you with the sticker, imdetermined.org, and the little bookmark, which is the I'm Determined bookmark, has these materials on that website. Maybe we can translate those things into Arabic. That would be cool for your students. But if you notice, it talks about a student's strengths, what their interests are, what their preferences are, so what works for them, and then what are their needs. Sometimes people will also list their weaknesses or the things that they don't do well. I like to focus on more of needs, so those things that you need in order to be successful, as opposed to identifying things that you maybe don't do as well. And what I want you all to do just for a moment is talk with a neighbor about one of your strengths and one of your needs. So I'm asking you to advocate for yourself and say, this is a strength, this is something I do well, and this is something I really need in order to do better. And think about school. So let's focus on if you're in a classroom. What is your strength as a student? What is something that you need in order to be more successful as a student? So talk to each other about that.
والله الإرادة يعني قوة الإرادة يعني إذا حطيت شيء في راسي لازم أسوي حتى لو قعدت 2 3 سنين 10 سنين أسوي. نقاط الضعف. أنت إيش نقاط ضعف؟ نقاط قوتي.
Go ahead and wrap up your discussion. I'm curious, how many of you felt that it was difficult to share your strength with somebody else? Show of hands. How many of you felt it was difficult to share a strength? A few of you? My students in the classroom find that really difficult. The first night of one of the courses that I teach, I actually ask them to list 25 things that make you special. And you would think I asked them to create peace on earth. The most, to just do the most difficult thing they could possibly do. 25? I have to tell you 25 things? But you can't advocate for yourself if you don't understand what makes you special. What are your strengths? What are those things that you do well? What do you bring that helps others and that helps you? It's easy to be critical of ourselves, right? It's easy to say all those things that we don't do very well, but it's hard to say, wow, I'm really good at this. So practice that. And if you do that with students, if you're working with students, you have to model it for them. That means you have to share some of your strengths, and you have to share some of your needs. So keep that in mind. I will tell you that this podium is a huge barrier for me. I am a teacher who moves a lot in the classroom. I don't like to lecture in front of a podium, and so this is a real challenge for me. So I need, except I have to, for the translator, right? I have to bring the microphone with me when I go around. I need a lapel mic so that I could move, and then you all would be spinning, trying to watch me, because I'm a mover. Thank goodness Dr. Daniel brought fidgets, so I can play with the fidgets when I'm not standing. In the center, you notice the little video reel. So students will create this, and they'll share it with their teachers. And sometimes they'll put a little video clip in the center, and they'll use whatever form of communication that they use to tell the teachers, these are my strengths, these are my preferences. So that's what that's for. Or they might just put a picture of themselves or a picture of something that they really like to do. So it's just to make it more personal, to share about themselves. This tool is called a Good Day Plan. And so the students identify what happens on a good day. What are the things that make a day a good day for me? And they come up with some questions about whether, how if it's happening now. So on the slide it says, am I getting what I need during the day? If yes, great, keep it up. If not, I need to move to the next column of my good day plan and think of options and alternatives. And then the next question is, what needs to happen to make it a good day? What strategies should I create? What goals should I set for myself? And so the students go through this and they create this sheet, and it helps them get through their day. And they also think about support. Our students should never have to do it alone. And a lot of times, particularly with our older students, we make assumptions that, oh, you can do this on your own. And we always need support. As adults, we need support, right? You all need it. I need it. Dr. Daniel and I are supporting each other through this presentation. It's an important part of us being successful. So we need to think about who supports us. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, and that's part of being self-determined too. But it's also okay to accept support from others. Mm-hmm. Yep, know your ability, rely on it, understand those things that are your limitations, and find others who turn those limitations into strengths. Right? So we've already kind of talked about this, but this idea, how do these ideas that we just shared, how do they support academic inclusion? How do they support social emotional inclusion? How do they support physical inclusion? So we want you to begin to think about this. So think about those three things. And we're going to ask you to write a few things down and share them with us. So I'm going to go to the next slide here. So there is a lot of material in there, a lot of things that we've addressed about academics, social, emotional, physical, sensory, thinking about those items, advocating for ourselves. So we have some sentence stems up here. So this is just to maybe help you out. So I'm scaffolding your learning a little. I don't want to forget that, and then ... So you begin thinking about what you don't want to forget from today, from what you learned from us. Or I plan to learn more about. So maybe there's something that we talked about today that you plan on doing more with. I will give you one example to model. I plan to go visit the I'm Determined website and look at those materials and watch some of their videos. I plan to try. So maybe you're thinking about, if I'm working with students, what is something I want to try with those that I'm working with? Or I plan to share. You have friends, others who are maybe training to become teachers or occupational therapists or physical therapists or whatever your career forward. What would you like to share with somebody who was unable to come to this session? What would you want to share with them? So we want you to take a moment and think about one of those sentence stems or come up with your own and tell us what is something that you learned today that you either plan to use or share or remember. So take a moment to do that. Okay, now who knows what I'm going to ask?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
What did you write?
I'm asking to find out what you wrote down, right? Yeah. So I asked you to do a task. Now I want to see that you completed the task. So would you like to share?
For me, I would like to learn more about universal design for learning, because I think it's much better for people with disabilities and normal people.
Somebody else. I saw a lot of people writing, so I know things were being written down. Don't be shy. Oh, yes.
بالنسبة للتعزيز أفضل استخدام التعزيز في الصف للطفل لدعمه ورفع من قدراته ومعنوياته بالذات ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة. التنويع في التعزيز بحيث يكون تعزيز مادي وتعزيز معنوي بشرط عدم الإفراط في التعزيز حتى لا يفقد قيمته. اختيار الوقت المناسب للتعزيز هذا بالنسبة لدعم الطفل في غرفة الصف. أنا شخصياً لدعمي الذاتي عندما تأتي إلى إدارة التعليم وأقوم بمساعدتها وتقديم لها المساعدة المطلوبة. كثير من الأحيان تأتينا الأمهات تطلب منا وجهيني إلى المكان المناسب، أنا لا أعرف، ساعديني. عندما أستطيع مساعدتها وتوجيهها وتحديد المكان المناسب لطفلها، هذا يعتبر لي يزيدني شغف وحب لعملي، ويعتبر داعم كبير بالنسبة لي، وخصوصا لما أسمع دعواتها وهي خارجة والسعادة في عينها. هذا كداعم ذاتي لي.
And you're providing the support. It's not just, that's a good example of it's not just about the individual, but it's how we can also provide that support so that that person could eventually become more independent. And parents are a very important part of that. Yes.
I have other comment. I would like to, I plan to try to find or negotiate the idea of labeling. I will try to find if any country around the world not labeling people. Is it successful? I believe labeling people is successful relatively, but I don't know if the not labeling is successful or not. Negative or positive result if we apply it. I plan to negotiate that and search for that. Thank you.
Yeah, we would like to give you a card so that we can find out your results when you find out that.
The lady back here.
Oh, yes.
لا أرغب في نسيان التوجيه الذاتي، وأرغب في تعلم المزيد من طرق التوجيه الذاتي، تطوير المهارات والاستقلالية. أرغب في تجربة تطبيق التوجيه الذاتي مع طالباتي للصف الابتدائي، سبق طبقتها في المرحلة المتوسطة والثانوية ولسه في بدايتنا الابتدائي ونزيد إن شاء الله. أرغب في مشاركة مخرجات التطبيق مع غيري من العاملين في المجال. إيش الفائدة والنتائج؟
Wonderful, thank you. So, yes.
دكتور، هل يمكنني أن أشارك بسؤالين عن الدمج الشامل أو التعليم الجامع؟
Yes.
دكتور، ذكرت في البداية أن معلم التعليم العام وعملية التعليم في فصول الدمج الشامل تلقى بالكامل على معلم التعليم العام. أنت ذكرت يا دكتور أن يجب على المعلم أن لا ينسى جميع الأطفال الموجودين في الفصل. هل المغزى من وجود المعلم المساعد هو بمثابة التذكير والإشارة للمعلم بوجود طفل مختلف أو طفل ذو احتياجات خاصة موجود في الفصل ويحتاج إلى تعليم أيضا؟
That's a really good question. In the United States, we have different systems for supporting students in the classroom. We might have an assistant, or what we call a paraprofessional or an instructional aide, who supports individual students who need that support. We also might do something called co-teaching. And actually at Radford University, our special educators and our general educators, when they're trained to become teachers, we put them together in schools and they teach together so that they work in the classroom as equals. One, more of a person who's in charge of strategy and how students learn, the way they think, and the other teacher more in charge of the content, what students are going to learn. And they work together, they collaborate, they plan together, they run the classroom together, so they're both seen as co-teachers. And that's a common model that we emphasize a great deal in the United States.
The reason I jumped up is because we're showing that today. So Darren and I are co-teaching this session. And Darren did a lot more theory and background, and I did a lot more hands-on strategies. I just as easily could have been supporting a math lesson and him giving it in the instruction in one way and me giving it in another. So showing that, to the best of my knowledge, nobody in this room has a disability, but you might, and we hope that we've targeted your learning needs, but that would be if we had gotten the time to know everybody and your learning needs, then we really would have targeted in on how we taught this. In a 2-hour session, you can't do that, but in a classroom, you would want 2 teachers who could work together to support people, and all the people.
So we want to finish with another video.
And while Darren's pulling that up, think about this. We'd love a selfie with all of you or a portion of you. If anybody's willing to be in a selfie with us, I'm going to that corner and take one backwards, and Darren's going to that corner and taking one backwards. If you're willing to be in a photo after we say we're finished.
We're leaving tonight, so we want to go off on a big note.
I'm determined. My name is Ferris Solange, and I am visually impaired. I have struggles and I have strengths. My disability doesn't define me, cause I'm determined, I am determined. I'm determined, I am determined. Throughout my education, I have had many obstacles. I have to ask for what I need. I have to be the one in charge of me, because I'm determined, I am determined. I'm determined, I am determined. I eat peace and self-advocacy, always getting what I need. I have to be the one to say, hey listen to me, because I'm determined, I am determined. I'm determined, I am determined. So if you have a disability, don't be afraid to ask for what you need. You're in charge of your destiny, so stand up tall and shout this rap with me. I'm determined, I am determined. I'm determined, I am determined. I'm determined, I am determined.
Thank you. Thank you.